Good evening, everyone. And on behalf of the Stanford Center for Biomedical Ethics, welcome to the 35th Annual Jonathan J. King Lecture. For those of you I don't know, I'm Holly Tabor, and I'm director of the center. And it's really an honor to have you with us this evening. And welcome to hundreds more who are joining us via live stream from around the world. Before we introduce our speaker, Dr. Arthur Kleinman, I want to offer heartfelt thanks to all of those who helped make tonight possible. First, Dr. Carrie Brenner, chair of the Jonathan King Lectureship Committee. Carrie is an exceptional leader of the lectureship, and her vision and creativity and collaborative spirit have been invaluable. It's just a joy to get to work with her on this. So please join me in giving Carrie a round of applause. I'm also really grateful to our committee members, Ellen King, Jonathan King's widow, whose decades-long dedication to this lectureship has been invaluable. So thank you, Ellen. Really appreciate it. And Dr. Justin Baker, Chief of Stanford's Division of Quality Life and Pediatric Palliative Care. Thanks, Justin. And also, very importantly, please join me in giving an extra strong round of applause and a very special heartfelt thank you to Daisy Artiega and Gabby Rivera, who I think are out in the hallway, whose behind-the-scenes efforts brought this evening to life. So we really appreciate it. So to ground us in the origins and the purpose of this lectureship, we'll begin with a short video featuring archival footage of Jonathan King and his founding inspiration. This video won a Silver Telly Award and was a finalist for a regional Emmy, and it captures Dr. King's enduring vision of integrating the humanities and personhood into medicine and offers a brief window into the history, mission, and heart of this lectureship. So without further ado.
I have a wife whom I love very much. I have two boys who are about to turn 6 and 12. Spent a lot of time with them. I'm working on my projects as much as I can. And this I consider to be a very important activity also.
Jonathan was inherently such a likable person. He was kind. He was honest. He was authentic. He was genuine. And he was just a lot of fun. And also very smart.
There's a line that divides people who have passed over into the condition I'm in from everybody else. In a way, there's no way that I can convey to you this feeling of the death sentence. I think the main one is to empathize, to put yourself in the shoes of your patient as much as possible. But I think the second point I'd like to emphasize is how important it is for the doctors and the medical staff to foster a patient's feeling of control and of hope to whatever extent you can, even if that's very, very small. When first the surgeon and then the oncologist told me, after the results of the post-operative tests came back, that yes, the mass we saw was the same type of cancer, and this is really what's going to happen. I needed to know that right away. Now, how can you try to give somebody in my situation a feeling of control and of hope in the face of all of this? Mm-hmm. What do you do? That's the art that you're trying to learn, I think.
As I said in my eulogy, I called him a humanist that wanted to make a difference for the people of the world.
A central point is treating the patient as a client, keeping the medical records open and available to the patient, of getting into your patient's head, understanding as far as possible what they need.
There were times when, of course, he was very, very down, and it was very hard for him to continue with the battle, but he did. And he maintained his normal family life as best he could under the circumstances.
Jonathan was many things. He was a scholar, scientist, social critic, jazz buff. He was devoted to his family. He was an honest commentator on life. He was too much a curmudgeon to be a naive optimist. Yet, he was too gentle and kind to be a pessimist.
When it comes to the lectureship, certainly, and the origins of the lectureship, it's all recorded in his journal. It reflects the enthusiasm he had, the vision that he had for it, and the determination he had to see this thing get started, and he really felt that it would have an important, lasting effect.
He was very sick by the time he did that session with Ernley. We had set it up and had the first speaker planned while he was still alive.
Rita Sharon presented the first Jonathan King Lectureship, 1991. A variety of remarkable people have given the lectures.
I think one of the roles of this lecture, and maybe the primary one, is what Dr. King was talking about, where he says, try to get into my shoes. Don't forget that your patient is a person. Build care around that.
I'm certainly not alone in all this. All of you must be aware just your being here means that you're part of a movement which is trying to make this happen. And I'd also like to be there, make a 3-minute introduction, and through the magic of editing, we could say, "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Jonathan King. Welcome to the 20th Annual Lecture."
To echo Jonathan's words, welcome to the 35th Annual Jonathan King Lectureship. I'm Dr. Carrie Brenner. I'm a psychiatrist and palliative care physician here at Stanford, and I'm chair of the Jonathan King Lectureship Committee. And tonight, it's our wholehearted privilege to welcome a true luminary, Dr. Arthur Kleinman, who wholeheartedly embodies the very mission and vision that Dr. King had reflected in that video. To empathize deeply, to recognize each patient's unique needs, and to never lose sight of the humanity of medicine. Dr. Kleinman completed both his undergraduate and his medical education here at Stanford, so tonight is an opportunity to welcome him back home. And it's particularly significant in the year of his retirement, as he anticipates that in July 2026. So in many ways, tonight's lecture serves as a capstone to an extraordinary career that has been transformative to the fields of medical anthropology, psychiatry, social medicine, global health, and the very essence of care itself. For over 5 decades, Dr. Kleinman has been a distinguished professor at Harvard, serving as chair of both the departments of social medicine and anthropology, directing Harvard's Asia Center, and mentoring generations of scholars. He is the Rabb Professor of Anthropology, as well as a professor in psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. He has authored more than 350 journal articles, book chapters, and seminal books. These groundbreaking works have profoundly shaped not only the culture of medicine, but society at large. His writings illuminate cultural nuances of the lived reality of illness, exploring the moral weight of caregiving and the expansive humanity that's at the heart of medicine. On a personal note, I first encountered Dr. Kleinman's most famous work, The Illness Narratives, over 20 years ago in my first year of medical school, and it shaped me immensely. And I imagine most of you in this room tonight have been reading his work for decades, some of you for maybe even half a century reading his works. And what was so striking to me when I revisited that same book this year was that he has this enduring, everlasting truth to his insights. The call for a multidimensional, deeply personal approach to human experience within illness. So this evening, Dr. Kleinman will speak on a theme that so beautifully reflects that mission. When care comes first, a radical reimagining of biomedical ethics. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Arthur Kleinman back home here to Stanford.
Thank you, Carrie. Well, thank you all. And I'm really honored to give this talk. I've given many, many talks, but just that wonderful film we just saw has set the stage beautifully for what I want to talk about. But I feel that the atmosphere is a little bit heavy, so I'm going to start with a joke, which is comes out of my own tradition of being a New Yorker, and it's very relevant to this talk, which I have given forms of this at probably half of America's medical schools and a large number of medical schools and hospitals outside the United States. And the story is the story of a harmonicist who's the first harmonica player to be invited by the New York Philharmonic to play the harmonica. And he practices and practices, plays the Bach preludes, and at the end of the preludes, there's a standing ovation. And in the back of the room, there is a small voice that says, "Play it again." And he says, "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm so delighted with your response. I'll play one of the preludes again." And he does, and again, a standing ovation, and the small voice in the back of the room says, "Play it again." To which he responds, "I'm so thrilled with this response, but I'm exhausted, I can't play it again." And the little voice says, "You'll play it again until you get it right." Okay, so that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to get this right, all right? It's an ambitious thing that I want to get right, because I'm going to make the suggestion in this talk that we have focused on things in bioethics that are not the most central, and also in medicine itself, and that what should be the most central is care. So to illustrate that I have bona fides, and I'm not just someone they pulled off the street because they couldn't find a lecturer, I've done 40 books and many journals that I've edited. But some of these are quite relevant to this lecture and to being back at Stanford. So on your lower right-hand side there, I gave the Tanner Lectures at Stanford in 1999. And you can see the illustrious group of people who gave the Tanner Lectures that year around the United States. Also very relevant to this talk are the 3 books in the top row in the middle, The Illness Narratives, What Really Matters, and particularly my more recent book, The Soul of Care. Together with Renee Fox and my long-term colleague, Alan Brandt, we did an issue way back in Daedalus that meant to ask bioethics to elevate its engagement with care, and that was called Beyond Bioethics and Beyond. And the other books are just other things that are relevant. So this is the soul of care, and much of what I'll say comes out of the soul of care. And the soul of care itself I've conceived as having 2 parts. It's a memoir and also an analysis of caregiving. The memoir tells the story of my late wife, Joan Kleinman, and myself. I met Joan when she was Joan Reiman in Palo Alto, here at Stanford, when she worked as a research assistant for Yuen Li Wu at that time, the great Hoover Institution economist who worked on China, and she was a young China scholar. We met because as a second-year medical student, I was unhappy with medical school. Wasn't sure that I wanted to continue. Thought that the strong emphasis that this medical school had at that time was on having bench researchers come out of school. So the school had just moved down 3 years before I started from San Francisco. It hadn't made effective clinical ties here, and it was a 5-year school, and it was dominated by its basic scientists, Arthur Kornberg, Paul Berg, Josh Lederberg. Great basic scientists, but not necessarily the best teachers of medical students. And when I was a first-year medical student in our biochemistry course, and Arthur Kornberg said to the students, all but 3 of whom were medical students, there were 3 PhD students and the rest were medical students, this is a course of biochemistry for biochemists. I thought to myself, we should have all gotten up, the medical students, and walked out of the room until they had a course in biochemistry for people who wanted to become physicians. And so anyway, I was unhappy at that particular stage, and I saw advertised a film series on Italian and French films, foreign films. And I went to buy the ticket at Treseder, which we're so close to here. And when I got there was a woman in front of me. And she said, I'm sorry, I don't know where Cubberley Auditorium is, because they just told her that the movie was actually at Cubberley Auditorium, and that's where she had to buy the ticket. And something inside me said, oh, don't worry, I'll show you the way, okay? And I walked with her, and as we approached Cubberley, I saw I was walking with a beautiful woman. Actually, it was said at Stanford at that time that Joan Reiman, that one of the most beautiful movie stars of that time, that Katharine Hepburn, was a Joan Reiman lookalike, okay? Because she was beautiful, and I was a scruffy medical student. And I said, could we have a cup of coffee after this film? And she looked at me, actually it was a very grudging look, and she said, all right. And the film, I'll never forget, was Les Enfants du Paradis, a classic French film. And it occurred to me while I was watching the film that I had an anatomy exam the next day. I don't know how I had blocked it out. And also it was an anatomy exam in which we had been told it would only be on the small bones of the hands and the feet. And if anyone got that 100%, they didn't have to take any other anatomy exam. And so it occurred to me that I really don't know this. And I was looking next to Joan, and I saw her feet, and I thought to myself, golly, what are those bones? And her hands, I could not remember the names of the bones clearly. So the film ended, and I said, I'm terribly sorry. I can't take you for a cup of coffee. I have an anatomy exam, I just realized. And she walked away from me. And I said, but you're going to be driving up Palm Drive, because she was from Palo Alto. And so, if you don't mind, you could drop me off at the anatomy building. Usually I didn't have that kind of chutzpah, but somehow it came out. She didn't say anything when she drove me and dropped me off at the anatomy building, but when she dropped me off, she reached across, grabbed the door that I had just come out of, slammed it, and said, you don't ever have to bother me again, and drove off. And I studied hard from the time she dropped me off, about 9:30, till 2 in the morning, on the bones of the hands and the feet. The exam was at 8 o'clock. By 9 o'clock, I was the only one in the class who got it all right. Every bone right, okay? I was excused, and this is why I'm not a surgeon, by the way. I was excused from all other anatomy exams, okay? That exam. But at 8 o'clock in the morning, I called over, because I knew she started then at Hoover, And I apologized tremendously to her and said, "Can I take you out for lunch?" And one of my classmates at that time used to sell sandwiches around the medical school. And I got a couple of sandwiches, and we went to the old theater, and I got to know her, and the result of that was that we were married for 46 years. She took care of me for 36 years. I took care of her for the 10 years that she had early onset Alzheimer's disease. And this book is a memoir, in part, of that caregiving I gave her for all but the last 9 months of her life from Alzheimer's. And so it's part of memoir, and that led me to think about, well, how does this memoir and the analysis of caregiving that's a kind of accumulation of what I've done in research and clinical work and teaching my whole life, how do they come together and what do they mean for medicine? And it occurred to me, the first thing, that we had the wrong image for medicine coming out of the Greek tradition, the rod of Asclepius. Why was it wrong? Because it is a winged serpent with a winged staff with a single serpent wound around it. When what we really should have, if care is our focus in medicine, is the caduceus of Hermes or Mercury, which is a winged staff with two serpents wound around, looking at each other and symbolizing reciprocity. And as I hope to show you, reciprocity is critical to the idea of care. So if we look at care in terms of its meanings, it brings together some things that at first we often don't consider. It's not just about helping people and protecting them and controlling them, for example, a young child, so they don't injure themselves, or an elderly person. It's also about anxiety or concern. So in the very socialization that we go through as human beings, we either are socialized with a kind of concern for others and for caring them, or we're not. And I grew up in that era, in the 1940s, when boys were socialized to be wantonly careless, and women were socialized as young girls to be careful. You can put together the meanings of those and where they come from, but that has been sort of standard in post-industrial societies all over the world. And that socialization has to do with the fact that around the world, women give most of the care. That may have a biological base, it probably does have some biological base, but it has a much stronger social and cultural base in the socialization of women toward a particular gendered role of care. Care is also about other kinds of anxieties and concerns, and that figures into the way I'm going to treat caregiving as well, if you let your mind imagine the different ways we can think of that. So caregiving is about supporting, assisting, and protecting someone who cannot fully care for themselves. Now, if we define caregiving ethnographically, in this sense, ethnography simply means the description of a local context and how people live in that context, then it's both the individual and collective human practice of caregiving, protecting, giving practical support, having solidarity, and it includes physical, emotional, interpersonal, and moral assistance. But it also is a reaction to the needs of others and ourselves, and it's necessarily linked to care receiving. And much of the time, on the kind of care I'm going to talk to you tonight, which is care for neurodegenerative disease, care for dementia, care for chronic illness, most of the time when we emphasize caregiving, we don't emphasize enough the reciprocity and the care receiving. If you think of family care, our presence is drawn out of us by the other. Our human presence is drawn from us. Remember the great Canadian singer Leonard Cohen, his anthem, Hallelujah. Something is drawn out of us, he says, and it's drawn by another person out of us. This is part of the reciprocity of care. It's reciprocal. Now, there are levels of care, and I'm not going to talk about, I just don't have time to talk about all the levels, but I do teach a course that I taught with my late, great former student, Paul Farmer, and with another former student of mine, Jim Kim, called Who Lives, Who Dies, Who Cares. And the first part of it is about humanitarian assistance, which is caregiving, you can imagine, at the collective level. Then there's professional caregiving, which is what a lot of people who've come tonight have come to hear. But care goes way beyond that. There's self-care, which our society now is actually very much taken up with. There's family and network care. Most of care, if we quantify caregiving, most of care is delivered in families. 90% plus of illness episodes recorded in illness diaries show that families give care that 90+% of the time. Under 70% of illness episodes actually come to any kind of professional for treatment. And of course, there's folk and religious care, which I'll say some things about a bit later. So if we look at what actually is the content of care, and here I just don't have time to review with you what I would do in the large course I've taught at Harvard on this for a long time, how this differs across cultures. If we just look at what's similar in this regard, the first thing that is crucial to care is relationships, the quality of the relationship, the quality of the reciprocity. And here, the anthropological idea of gift exchange is a very interesting way to think about care, because it suggests that what is being exchanged is not just the physical benefit of someone helping you with a practical way. You have a broken leg, an orthopedic surgeon helps you fixing the fracture and recuperating from it. It's also the quality of the engagement with your personal experience of illness, as we saw in the wonderful film that preceded this lecture. Relationship, in my experience, is crucial to caregiving. You want to look at high-quality caregiving, it's based in high-quality relationships. Accompaniment. This is the idea that my late, great student, Paul Farmer, pushed based on liberation theology. He was a deeply believing Catholic who put into practice the liberation theology idea of accompanying people, of being with them. And that's in fact what physicians for the longest period of time have indicated symbolically by looking someone in the eye, reaching out and grasping their arm and saying, "How can I help you?" Which gives the symbolic significance, I'm there for you, I'll be with you, you're not going to be alone in this. And this, of course, is what happens in families, when families respond, etc. I don't mean, by the way, I don't mean to romanticize care. There are all kinds of problems that relate to these things, and we'll get into that as well. So I've talked about presence. I want to emphasize that care is part of that dimension of life, live together with others, that's based in reactions. We talk about choices and action, but actually most of life is reacting, not acting. It's reacting to things that are occurring in intimate relationships, in professional relationships. It's that we have a chance with reaction to do something better, to improve, to get over a failure. Ritual and habits. I told you I took care of my late wife, Joan, for 10 years. In the last 9 months, she had to go into a nursing home because of her, she became paralyzed at the end of her early onset Alzheimer's, and I couldn't care for her at that time. But I got through 10 years of taking care of her. And how do you do that? How did I do that? How do so many people do that kind of thing? It's through often ritualizing and developing good habits in William James's sense, that habits are crucial to how we live a good life. Making things habitual, so we don't have to think about them, we just do them. I did that by organizing the day in a ceremonial order, from waking her in the morning, helping her go to the toilet, doing our exercises together, bathing her, helping her have breakfast, over the last few years, literally feeding her. But I did it all in a ceremonial order, which I didn't have to think about after a while. It became a habit that got me through the day. And in family caregiving, this is characteristic of how people get through caregiving. And the women in this audience who've given birth and raised children know that, and had also with that raising children, not only took care of the house, but maybe also had a professional life. They know how this happens, as do all of us who have elderly friends or family members who are in decline owing to a neurodegenerative disease or some other serious chronic illness, and we help them. This is part of what we do, ritualizing that help, so we can carry it through. And this ties to, for me, a critical idea that I spent a lot of time with in The Soul of Care. And that's the idea of enduring. I absolutely reject the idea of resilience, which I think is an Americanism based in Hollywood. None of us are resilient in life. I've had a golden career, an incredible life. I am not resilient. I was broken by taking care of my late wife, as every family member is in situations like that. And as practitioners are vulnerable to that sense. That's why neurologists are such lousy caregivers for neurodegenerative diseases, because of their vulnerability, the fear that they have, which they defend by not being involved at all in caregiving after a stroke or with dementia care. I had been at Harvard for 3 decades, 3.5 decades, when my wife developed early onset Alzheimer's disease. It started in the occipital lobes, and so the problems were in vision, in the interpretation of vision. No one could figure out what was wrong. Our major, if not one of the world's major neurologists, was a very close friend of mine at the Brigham and Women's Hospital, who spent 2.5 hours with Joan and came up with a diagnosis, reread the MRIs and the CT scans, showed the early signs of cortical atrophy, made the diagnosis. 2.5 hours he spent with us. At the end, he just shook his head and said, "I'm terribly sorry to tell you that this is early onset Alzheimer's disease." And he had nothing else to tell us. Zero. He would do anything for me. He spent all this time because he wanted to help me as well as Joan. He had no sense that he should have said something like, "Hey, you're going to have to prepare yourself now, the two of you, for care. Let me give you some ideas about what you're going to have to do. And you should speak to a social worker. You're going to have to get at some point, a home health aide. Because of the blindness as well as the dementia, you're going to have to reconfigure the house." All those things in terms of care. He could have told us, he could have said, "Look, we really don't know what causes Alzheimer's disease. And also, we're not sure that there's only one disease. It may be multiple, and perhaps your form is different than others." And he could tell us at that time, honestly, there really is no treatment. What there is care. What there is care. None of that. That's again, because he didn't think of care as an important part of what his role was. Okay? And this is what I'm trying to convey to you, that we actually have medicine in which we have gotten away from the idea that care is fundamental. I'm going to talk a little bit at the end, if we have time, about the Caring for Memories, which is a book I'm writing about now. And I think it's important because memory is what bereavement is about. And anticipatory bereavement is key to caregiving as we anticipate the loss of a person. So the core tasks of caregiving begin with acknowledgement and affirmation. It's said by Emmanuel Levinas, the great late French philosopher and theologian, that affirmation and acknowledgement are the ethical beginning of relationships. That's how you begin a relationship ethically. That's what happens when the doctor looks the patient in the eye and says, what are you here for? What's the problem? How can I help? Okay? Now just think of how this has all changed in our time. The electronic health record, which my colleague Atul Gawande has brilliantly satirized, okay, is only good for billing, okay? But it is bad for the doctor-patient relationship, because acknowledgement and affirmation means you have to be looking at the person, not have your back to them, okay? Why do we have our back to our patients? Because electrical engineers, not physicians, created the electronic medical record. And you're trying desperately to follow the electrolytes, what else is happening in terms of biomarkers or that you're following, medications. You're trying to find this in a system that electrical engineers developed, not physicians thinking about it. It's gotten better, getting better. For example, when EMRs came out, electronic medical records came out, there was no space for nursing notes. You work in a hospital, nursing notes are critical to knowing what happened in the last 12 hours to the patient. Now there is space for that. Accompaniment I've talked about. Practical assistance with the work of caring. This is real caregiving. In the audience, I was a first-year medical student who was a Harvard undergraduate who did a brilliant senior honors thesis on the act of cleaning. He became a home health aide for a period of time and wrote about what cleaning elderly men was about. That's an important part of caregiving: feeding, cleaning, toileting, ambulating, protecting, emotional support. I don't think I need to talk to an audience like this about emotional support, but it's critical in caregiving. Another one of my former students, Nicholas Christakis at Yale, wrote a brilliant book on this called about prognosis, about how physicians believe so much in self-fulfilling prophecy that prognoses are always given as the glass is half full, not half empty. There's a reason that we do that, to stimulate hope, to keep it alive, etc. That's an emotional support. Moral solidarity. I gave this talk some years ago, something like it, in Stockholm. And I got to moral solidarity, and there was a hand went up in the audience, and it was the Lutheran Bishop of Stockholm, who said, I know exactly what you mean by a moral solidarity. I go to the homes of parishioners of mine who are comatose, who are near death, who have no recognition that I'm present. I'm there because of this moral bond between us. Moral solidarity is critical. The acts that I'm talking about in care are really acts that are morally based. And I'm going to emphasize in this lecture for bioethics the importance of moral experience and moral actions to complement high-level ethical abstractions like justice, non-maleficence, autonomy. They must be complemented by the moral practices that are crucial to our lives as caregivers. I talked about the other points already. Values and caregiving. Caregiving, as I'm presenting it to you, is an existential act that defines our humanity and our relationships with others. It's one of the things that truly matters. It's a basic response to the context of danger and uncertainty that defines the human condition. In practice, when you speak to hundreds and hundreds of families about family caregiving, and I would say also professional caregiving, can be burdened, but are not necessarily best mapped as a burden. Rather, what people tell you is that it's a way of life, a way of being in the world. It's the way they are. I had the opportunity some years ago to write the preface to a great book on caregiving called The Caregiver by E.S. Goldman, who was an outstanding writer for The New Yorker, and like me, had taken care of his wife when she had Alzheimer's disease. And E.S. Goldman's book was very widely read, and there was a bookstore in Cambridge, the Porter Square bookstore, that invited him to give a talk. He was 93 years of age. He asked me to accompany him. He had a walker. Spittle came out of his mouth as he talked, but his mind was absolutely clear. He gave a beautiful talk based on his book. And when he finished, there was a hand in the audience. It was a young woman. And she said to him, Mr. Goldman, I just don't quite understand. Why did you do this? Why did you choose to take care of your wife when it was so difficult, when you did all these things? And he stopped. You could see he was confused. And Goldman said, I'm not sure what you mean. Could you restate the question? And she restated the question. And he said, it was there to do. I didn't choose. It wasn't a decision. It was part of our marriage. It was there to do. And you know, hundreds of people have told me that. It was there to do. It was no decision. It was there to do. There's both a good and a bad side it was there to do. Lots of care is coerced care. It's coerced care, culturally coerced by that person in the family who is seen as most vulnerable and to doing the care and least able to protest. A lot of care is coerced care. A lot of care is not coerced care, but it occurs in that it's there to do, I do it. That's what care was for me, and I'm sure for many of you in this room. In that sense, it's part of our ethical aspiration of how we want to live a good life, and I'll come to that in a bit. But I will say this, in a global culture of cynicism and a sense of misplaced loyalty, which has been deepened in our time, caregiving is frequently perceived as one of the truly worthy objects of ethical commitment. When you really work with people to figure out how do they commit themselves ethically, it often is around care. Now, challenges to caregiving. One are familial challenges. Crisis and long-term care funding. So I took care of my wife for 10 years. We both had long-term care insurance. 95% of Americans do not have long-term care insurance. If we were Japanese, if we were Dutch, if we were German, if we were Scandinavian, we would have long-term care insurance. That long-term care insurance that I had paid for the home health aide, who was critical to the care that I was able to contribute to, but also for the 9 months that Joan was in a nursing home, a wonderful nursing home in the Boston area called Newbridge on the Charles, part of the Hebrew Home for the Aged. it paid $50,000 toward that 9 months. I paid $150,000 toward those 9 months. Those 9 months cost $200,000. I had the resources to pay that. Most Americans do not have the resources to pay that. My adult children and I, my adult children have PhDs. One is a soil scientist, the other a political scientist. We visited together 22 nursing homes in the Boston area before we found one for my wife. 6 to 7 of them made us cry when we left the nursing home. We usually don't cry. They were so terrible. They were unacceptable, totally unacceptable. And actually, this is probably, if you went to almost any other city, the number that are unacceptable would be much higher. The Boston area is blessed with lots of acceptable, maybe not great, but acceptable nursing homes. What does it mean to be unacceptable? It means that you go into a nursing home and the first thing you do is you smell urine and feces. And you realize that your loved one who's there, that's what they're smelling every day. You see people who, with their hands up or constantly ringing a bell, but their inadequate number of home health of health aides working in the nursing home. And so they're soiled. They're sitting in their own, what they've just defecated, their own shit. They're sitting in it, raising their hands, asking for assistance. There just aren't enough people to take care of them. Those are really unacceptable settings. And yet, what I've just told you is true for most Americans in nursing homes who cannot afford what I was able to afford. And somehow we've allowed that to happen. Just think of this. Does anyone know what the average turnover of health assistants, of nursing assistants who do the kind of care I just went over is in, if we remove the very top level nursing homes, like the one that Joan was in, and we look for the average across country, what's the average turnover in nursing assistants? It's 100%. Every year, there's 100% turnover in nursing home assistants. Read the work of Iron Poo, who's done, I think, the best work in that area. That just gives you a sense of how backbreaking, so low the financial support is, how low the status is for those kinds of jobs. And who does those jobs? The very people who ICE is arresting all over the country right now, because no one else wants to do that work. So we should think again about, if that's the case, what does that tell us in our society about care for the elderly, or care for the disabled, or care for those with serious illness who have to be institutionalized? What does that tell us about where we value it? Not what we say, but what we allow to happen, what we do. Because increasing numbers of people, largely women, have entered the workforce, there's a question of, and men have not taken up the responsibility of contributing to family care the way they should be. There's a problem in who are the people who are going to take care of the elderly. Who's going to take care? I'm 84 years of age. Who's going to take care of our generation, those of us who are in our 80s and 90s? The challenge of values to family care. We're living in a moment in which there is an anti-care atmosphere central to our times. And it's important to recognize that and to realize we're going to have to do better than that. The repercussion of stigmatized conditions. Stigmatized conditions have a kind of courtesy effect on family members who take care of them. they become stigmatized as well. And then there are knowledge needs and information and communication gaps that I can talk about later. So what are the professional challenges in caregiving? Limited time for interacting with patients. The average primary care follow-up visit in the United States is 11 minutes. That actually is not bad in global perspective. I just was in East Asia. In Korea and China, the average visit for follow-up with specialists in the hospital is under 3 minutes. Okay? That's professional care in much of the world. Okay? So India and China and Japan account for 45% of the world's population. Much of the care given in South Asia, in East Asia, is under the pressure of time. A pressure of time that's so great that you simply cannot give care. You cannot give care in 3 minutes. Electronic technology. I'm actually work with AI. I believe in technology. But if we do an honest view of technology in medicine and healthcare systems as it relates to care, much of the time it makes care more difficult to do and reduces the quality of care. And that's because we don't think ahead of time and look systematically at what technology actually does. There are weakened incentives for quality care, and there's physician burnout, which is so widespread that more than 50% of primary care physicians in our society describe the symptoms of burnout. Now, this may be if you're going to take anything away from this talk, take this away, okay? We do not measure the quality of care. First of all, we have no measures of the quality of care. What we do is a sleight of hand, but a sleight of hand with motive behind it. We measure institutional efficiency and call it the quality of care. Institutional efficiency is X number of patients at Y cost moving through a healthcare system with Z outcome. That is not a measure of care. That's a measure of efficiency, how efficient the system is. Frequently, efficiency can go along with high quality care, but also there are times when it is the enemy of high quality care. So there are no direct measures of care. To measure care directly, we would have to measure the time spent together with doctor, with nurses, with in referrals. We'd measure the quality of the interpersonal relationship, the quality of communication, including listening, explaining, following up. By and large, in most medical schools, medical students are never taught how to explain a particular disease to patients. You think about that, that's an amazing oversight, okay? And where there have been comparisons of, say, doctors like orthopedic surgeons versus chiropractors, non-doctors, who do explain to patients, patient satisfaction is higher with a non-medical group. Okay? Outcome, fortunately, is better usually with the physicians, but satisfaction is higher with a non-medical group. We can measure all these things now with AI. This is what, in my view, one of the great uses of AI. I may not see it in my lifetime, but in the coming decades, we will measure most of these things. And we will, for the first time, have measures of the quality of care. That'll conclude the quality of the physical exam to the extent that the physical exam is still being used by doctors. One of the sad things where I'm from, in Boston, is that most of our residents don't do the physical exam anymore because they have the technology that provides more definitive results. But if you think of the physical exam, that's critical in touch, skin-on-skin touch, to the physiology underlying the placebo effect. Crucial to all the things I'm talking about in caregiving. Quality of clinical judgment. We never assess the quality of clinical judgment once someone has left a training program. And even in training programs, we don't usually assess this. and actual practices, clinical practices. All these things we can assess, and I think we will assess in the future. Now, concerns. To your right is a picture. Does anyone know who painted that? Picasso. That's the only time he painted the head of a medical student. Okay? It's the head of a medical student. And when asked why he painted the head of a medical student, he said, well, because I think something happens to them over time. And an eye closes. One eye closes. It's been interpreted, well, does one eye close to protect the medical student? Or does one eye close because the medical student is being disoriented from, alienated from care? We have 8 major studies in 8 medical schools in the United States that show that fourth-year medical students are fortunately better in science and technology than first-year medical students related to medicine, but are worse in all the aspects of caregiving that I've gone over. That is an astonishing thing for a medical educator. I've been a medical educator for more than half a century, and only recently have I come to realize that there literally is something toxic in the education of medical students that makes them worse when they graduate than when they come in the tasks of caregiving. Almost every medical school in the United States is under curriculum review right now and curriculum reform, and is trying to deal with this because people are taking this finding so seriously. But no one is certain how to combat it because we're not quite sure what it is in medical education that has this toxic effect. So we need to rethink not only medical education, but what's happening in medical education. And people are placing attention and concern and increasing interest in things like the medical humanities, bioethics, the medical social sciences, et cetera, in order to figure out ways of delaying or preventing this negative consequence of socialization in medicine from occurring. But I would say this is part of what I want to get at by making ethics, care, the foundational concern of ethics, the central concern. What does it mean when we see care under assault in the very education that we are setting out for our medical students? Caregiving and resource scarcity. I think if you don't mind, because I'm running late, I'm going to skip this for the time being and can come back to it if you're interested. So I want to present bioethics from the perspective of the field that I have developed over the course of my career clinically in medical school at Harvard, medical anthropology. And I want to suggest that one of the things that comes out of this that's important for bioethics is the importance of social theories. Now, we know that bioethics is very interested in philosophical ideas and philosophical methods. But social theories are very important as well. So in medical anthropology, I'm one of those who took the idea of disease and illness, which came out of the work of the great Yale clinical epidemiologist Alvin Feinstein, and developed it in a way that would be useful for ethics and for medical training and for practice around care, where disease is the medical, any kind of medical, not just biomedical, but even traditional medical systems, understanding of the pathology and how the symptoms relate to the pathology. Whereas illness is the actual experience that a person brings to the doctor-patient relationship. That illness experience is critical in care, critical to care, and yet it's often left out of care, so that the physician attends to the disease but lets the illness experience go by. This has been known for over 100 years in medicine. And Cabot, a great physician at my medical school, at the early part of the 20th century, saw this as a problem in the way that we thought about care. And that relates to the illness experience and how we learn about it, which is through illness narratives. That's another way, bringing narratives, stories that we tell, about our experience, into the training of doctors in the practice of medicine, in order to get at context, how the local context affects the care. Local moral worlds, that has to do with the fact that we're all embedded, not necessarily in the classical village or the classical neighborhood, but in social networks that can be transcontinental, represent our families and our social ties, and even our social media ties that help to create a world of values in which we are inhabited and inhabiting. Unintended consequences of purposive action. In 1948, Robert Merton, a great Columbia sociologist, introduced this idea. You'll be hard-pressed to find, his idea was that every social action, every policy, every program has not unintended consequences. He saw it due to many factors, but particularly, he had a wonderful phrase for this, which was called the imperious immediacy of the present. The imperious immediacy of the present that prevented us from seeing things that we didn't want to see, that were outside the purview of the programs we wanted to see be successful. That's a critical idea for any kind of medical intervention, unintended consequences. And then the idea of social suffering. Social suffering simply means that pain and suffering come together and are caused by social forces, global and local economics, political situations, institutions, relationships, structural violence, poverty, namely. Also, that suffering is almost always interpersonal. I'm using Alzheimer's as one of my examples. Think of the adult children of an Alzheimer's patient with their parent, the parent now seriously cognitively affected. You may not see any sign of suffering, and when you speak to them, they may report no suffering. But if you look for suffering, it's in the interpersonal space between them and their adult children. The institutions that we create also contribute to the problems, much as I talked about nursing homes. So that social suffering is about how we create institutions that contribute to the problems that care then has to address. Everything I'm saying to you now is based on the primacy of experience. In 1900, William James said that all knowledge is based in experience, and that the purpose of social action and personal action is to make that knowledge available to improve the experiences of individuals and of societies. Experience is what we're all encountering all the time. It's an orientation of overwhelming practicality in the face of real danger and uncertainties. This all, by the way, comes out of my Tanner lectures of 1999. It is moral, and these local worlds are moral, because things are at stake for us that organize our experience. And so if you want to see what is morally at stake for us in local experience, you see what people do rather than what they say. You go to a clinic and it says, serve the people. But actually, when you're in the clinic, you see that it's serving profit. That's the kind of thing, when we look at care and emphasize experience, that is crucial from the ethical perspective. The dangers and uncertainties that experience is concerned with are many different kinds and have to do with health and aging, disasters, accidents, chronic and degenerative diseases, health catastrophes that surround us. John Brown, the great English physician in the 17th century, said, "I who have seen 1,000 deaths, thank my God I can die but once," argued that no one should have to see all the diseases that there are. Just medical students. Why do medical students feel vulnerable and become defensive? Because when you go through the textbook of pathology, you realize just how enormous are the threats to human beings. Economic and social threats, political threats, and the like. Now, I want to, it's very hard to do this in a short period of time, but I want to suggest that all those experiences within us, of which some of them are about illness and some are about joy, etc., most of them are not formulated. They're not framed. Only a small number of them get framed and formulated. And when they get formulated, they become our memories. Our memories are formulated experiences. And one of the things about memory that's so powerful and that occurs in bereavement when we mourn is that lots of experiences that have become memories that are not ones that we formulated flood us with dreams, with daydreams, with fantasies, with feelings. All of that domain is what we have classically called the unconscious part of life. That is critical to care. And care is what, the caring of memories is what loss and bereavement is about. You saw a film about it sounded like a wonderful man that started this evening. Just think about the people who love that wonderful man and the memories that that film relates to. The caring of memories occurs when you, in your mind, see those films. Oops.
Dr. Kleinman, I think we're also at time, and so one of
look, I was trained in
remarks.
I was trained in the Fidel Castro school of lecturing. I'm only a third of the way through. Let me see if I can bring it to a close here. So when care comes first of bioethics, I should at least get to the topic, right, for the night. You know, George Engel, the wonderful physician, wrote a great paper that was about what to do when you're on a panel and the chair tells you you've run out of time. There are three things he said you do. The first thing is you disregard the chair. Okay? So that's what I'm doing. I'm looking away, right? The second thing George said that you do is that you speed up your talk. You go faster. But he said there was a third, and it was the most effective. And that is, you say, ladies and gentlemen, I've just come to the sexually interesting part of my talk. I'm going to have to stop. And then everyone demands that you continue, okay? Just give me a few more minutes. Okay. What are the consequences of making quality care more central to management, policy, and practice in healthcare systems? What are the consequences when quality care is made central to the training of medical students and residents? Now, it's very hard to flunk out of very hard to get into medical school, very hard to flunk out. But I can tell you, at my medical school, we should have flunked a whole bunch of people who I saw over the years. And I'm sure it's true at Stanford as well. What are the consequences for technological development and use in healthcare when quality care is used to evaluate AI, robotics, etc.? I'm on a committee of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences right now on AI and mental health. And the most dangerous individuals I've ever met are on this committee. They are psychologists and psychiatrists who are also software engineers. And they run major divisions of companies who you would recognize the name very, very readily. And their idea is that chatbots will replace therapists, okay? Chatbots cannot replace therapists because they're algorithms. They're not human beings. They don't have a limbic system. They don't have a sensitivity to emotion. They cannot deal with ambiguity, and they cannot provide what another brain, another human being, another context-sensitive being can give. So when care comes first for bioethics, how does the primacy of care influence the current principles guiding bioethics? I'm suggesting that the central principle should not be autonomy or justice, it should be care. What happens when cultivation of the practitioner's caregiving becomes the central virtue ethic in bioethics? That instead of just talking about abstract principles, we talk about the virtues of the caregiver, of the professional caregiver. Can the primacy of care enable a more adequate development globally of bioethics, a bioethics that works in different cultural spaces? And then I'll leave this for later and just say that colleagues and I have a book coming out in next fall, based on a course we've taught at Harvard for a long time, called Quest for Wisdom, the case for uniting bioethics with the medical humanities. And this is the point that I had hoped to make more fully, but since I've run out of time, let me just come to the last part of this. Okay. A Chinese example. So I do my research in China. I'm a China scholar. In the 5th century, a great Chinese work was written called the Wenqin Diaolong, The Literary Mind and the Carving of Dragons. Read The Carving of Dragons as a practical act of artistry or artisanal work. The quality of mind, the carving of dragons, it drew off of the multiple traditions that have made China so rich culturally, Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism, and made the point that values are tied to aesthetics and are tied to moral experience. And that's what I've tried to tell you tonight. And my recommendations are that we need a moral movement for care in our society. We all should be part of a moral movement for care. That we need to recognize the anti-care biases of our time. We need to do advocacy and community work to develop that movement, and legal and policy interventions that can generate its momentum. The recommendations for medicine are that we need to reorient medical education and healthcare systems and respond to such problems as burnout through that moral movement. Thank you. I'm going to stay up here and take this.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kleinman. It's incredible to see your boundless knowledge in so many different domains and such a multidimensional way of thinking. Everyone is welcome to stay for conversation, cocktails, hors d'oeuvres out on the patio as well as in here until 7:30. So please enjoy the time together. A few other housekeeping announcements before we enter into that space. First, if folks could pull up the QR code that was on that last slide. This is enormously helpful to inform us to continue these lectureships ongoing for future years. So it's just a few quick questions. And for folks folks at home who are live streaming, you can also fill out that QR code for us as well. And then second, what was going to be just a one-day visit for a lectureship has blossomed into an entire week of events with Arthur Kleinman because of just his enormous, vast amount of knowledge. So I wanted to just feature a few of these that are open to the public this week. The first one is medical grand rounds tomorrow at noon on the extraordinary importance of high quality care for medicine in our world today. The second, the Department of Anthropology is hosting an event tomorrow evening on Wednesday at 5:30, why we need the humanities in medicine. And then finally, geriatrics is hosting a grand rounds this Thursday at 12:30, social technology for global and aging initiative at Harvard. So feel free to join for future events, and we're so grateful for your presence here at Stanford.
Yeah.